Here I have for you today a Victor TKF Ultra, Thruster Ultra. This is the, I guess by now, the second newest Victor racket to come out, with the newest racket coming out being the RSpeed 100X Ultra, I think it's called. That one kind of debuted for the World Tour Finals in Hangzhou, and yeah, so I guess that means this one's old news now. Now, the reason I haven't done anything with this yet is because I got this racket, or rather I had a friend helped me get this racket right when it came out, but that was just before I broke my finger, so I never had a chance to do anything with it. So yeah, we're just gonna do a short video where I go through my gripping process so that I can get it strung and I can go and play with it now that my finger is almost better, which is, yeah, it's this one. You can see the difference here. Looks kind of messed up. So let's go ahead and get started. What I have here in front of me is most of the tools that I usually use when I'm gripping a brand new racket. So I've got some stuff here for cleaning and removing the original grip. Now this, you'll be able to tell this is a free core handle. So this is like the plastic handle that Victor has. And as such, I don't expect there to be too much trouble or resistance here. So we're probably not going to need this, but I'm just going to quickly go through everything that I have here in front of me, starting with the most obvious, which is this roll of Yonex Super Grap. I go through a lot of these, and we got some cushion wrap here. This is Goo Gone and a little piece of rag. So I usually need this if there's some stubborn adhesive, which I'm really hoping there's not. But again, seeing as this is a free core handle, probably won't need that. Got some electrical tape. Now, usually this would be more important if we were doing a racket with a wooden handle. Again, this is free core handle, so we don't really need to use electrical tape to protect the handle, I guess, but I like putting it on anyways because the cushion wrap kind of sticks pretty well to the electrical tape, and it's a little harder to apply that to the plastic handle, and it just kind of, I find the electrical tape just gives a nice little intermediary layer of I guess shock absorption or whatever, especially since the plastic can feel a little awkward right under your hand. We also have tweezers, which we, again, probably won't need. Scissors. This is for removing the staples, so put those off to the side until we need them. I also have my box of grip equipment here next to me. I'm not going to show you that because it's really messy, but let's just put these all off to the side for now, and we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so first things first, we can remove the plastic. Some people like to keep this on, so if you're not someone who likes to take the undergrip off, you can keep this on, and the resale value you can sell for a little higher just because it will look more like a pristine racket. I never do that though, because you know, when I buy these rackets, I always buy it with the intent of using it fully until I understand whether or not I want to keep it or not. Let's see. It's an interesting looking racket here. So one thing about this racket that you'll notice is that, or you may or may not notice, is that the shaft is really thin. And I think this 5.8 millimeter shaft is supposedly the thinnest, if not one of the thinnest shafts currently in production. And they Victor, I mean, was really boasting about this shaft when they first came out with this racket. If you kind of look at it, squint, in the bigger picture, you might find this comical. I know that I did when I first picked up this racket, because the Thruster series is known for having a large, very square-shaped head. And that paired with the extremely thin shaft gives kind of this area a very comical proportion where it looks extremely fragile and thin here, and it looks quite beefy up here. At least I thought that was funny. Now, I have played with a Thruster Enhanced before, a while ago. Pretty easy to use racket. I think overall an interesting design. And the main feature of the Thruster rackets that you'll notice is the very square-shaped head. Right, we can see this right here. So that means it's got a very large sweet spot. Now, the reason that I didn't end up purchasing one of those originally is because I felt the sweet spot, well, when you talk about a large sweet spot, everyone talks about it, the racket companies market it such that it's, all positive without any downsides. Because, bigger sweet spot means easier to hit the center, right? But we don't really talk about the fine print there, which is that the bigger the sweet spot is, the less of a natural, progressive feeling to the sweet spot you will get. And what I mean by that is, just give me a second here, gotta get this plastic off. What I mean by that is, in a traditional egg-shaped head, you have maybe a smaller sweet spot. I can represent that right here with this. And when you widen the sweet spot, you make the taper from the edge of the racket to where the sweet spot begins much smaller. Okay? And what that means is that when you're hitting to the edge of the sweet spot here, the difference between that and hitting it completely off the sweet spot, breaking the strings or having a terrible feedback, that difference becomes very small. It's not a very progressive feeling. Whereas in a traditional egg-shaped racket head, as soon as you start hitting a little bit off center, you will get some of that feedback. It's not going to feel quite as satisfying, but it will give you better feedback as to where exactly on the racket head you're actually hitting. So what I'm getting at is that if the sweet spot's too big, you start to lose a little bit of that learning process for figuring out where on the racket you're hitting it. And at least for me, I don't know if this is just in my head or whatever, when the sweet spot is too square, I personally feel like there's something strange going on with the string resonance here. And again, I don't know if that's because there's not as natural of a progression through the relationship of each string to the next string. But at least to me, it feels a little bit like I lose a very crisp response, at least in the dead center. So, but there's a situation for everything, and having a large sweet spot, at least for a competition racket, could definitely be a good thing. And if you're in a situation where the feedback off the contact is numb anyways, for example, in humid conditions, then maybe that doesn't really matter as much to you. So as I'm removing this grip, and you can probably see this is coming off absolutely effortlessly. There's actually not any adhesive whatsoever here. This is just clean plastic handle. And that is the, I guess you could say, dream come true when we're working with a grip like this, because it just makes my life so easy. What we seems like we do have a little bit of, adhesive tape at the bottom here that might have to clean up later. So we'll see. we could get lucky and it all just comes off with the grip. Extremely satisfying. I'm gonna throw that on the floor. All right. One of the other nice things about free core handles is that usually there's no staples. I mean, there's not really a good way to embed staples in this plastic handle, I guess. So we've got ourselves a really nice clean one here. You can see, if you look closely, you can kind of see the shaft inside the cone there. Maybe there's not enough light, but the shaft is running through here. There's a couple different pieces. And the end cap is this interesting shape here. It's never like this on wooden rackets. I'm not super sure why. It's usually like it's got like a smooth outer contour to it. But you can see here that it's actually a little different. Instead, it's just, I guess the best way to describe it is like a truss, like a supporting beam of some sort, and there's just a lot of these little ridges. Something. Anyways, so we can get to cleaning this up then. So, as I've done in my last video, we're gonna start by hitting this with isopropyl, and unlike with the wood grips, we don't really have to feel any guilt of hitting this with the wipes because this is just plastic. It doesn't really care at all. So we're gonna wipe this down a little bit. And let's see how the adhesive that was on here reacts to this. It's doing a little bit of damage, but it might be a little hesitant to come off. Let's see. So about free core handles is it's a little bit of a controversial topic, right? We've had wooden handles have existed for not just badminton rackets, but several different types of sporting equipment for hundreds of years. And natural wood is very nice because it has natural, well, it's strong, it's got good, well, okay. We also have to address the fact that there are several different types of wood. We're not really going to go into that, but wood has a lot of good natural resonant properties. That's part of the why that wood is always used in kind of traditional instruments. And the same can be said of sporting equipment. For similar reasons too. It's like not just the sound that gets transferred, but any sort of energy or frequency, and that's where the kind of the transfer of feedback and power, those kinds of things. That's why wood is nice. So this free core handle here, some people do not like this because they claim that it feels dull, kind of damp, I guess. And if you were to try to imagine in your mind perhaps what a plastic piano would sound like, probably wouldn't sound too great, would it? So I think that there's definitely a point to be made there. Now, how the free core makes up with that is it adds extra resonant length in the shaft, because the shaft can actually have movement when it's inside the handle here. Whereas if it's wood, generally speaking, the shaft doesn't flex past where it's inside the cone. But with a free core handle like this, it allows for some shaft flex inside the handle. Now, it's not so sure if you can see this. It's hard to tell. But ideally, it would be flexing inside the shaft. And the other thing that people say is that the free core handle itself is liable to flex under high load. It's like the handle itself is being bent or whatever. I don't know if that's true. I haven't necessarily seen that. But so I think we will have to tack this with some Goo Gone. I think I'm gonna put on gloves just because Goo Gone gets really gross. Now I will say that a free core handle just by itself doesn't feel as satisfying to hold. The feedback on the hand isn't quite as good. Some of my older free core rackets, I am also getting a little bit of creaking. I've heard that rattling is common too. But I will say that I do appreciate the extra movement in the shaft. And as you follow more of my content and hear me talk about more rackets, you'll learn that I am a very big appreciator of rackets that really give you freedom with manipulating the flexibility, the timing, and power transfer in the shafts. And that's really, I think, kind of the highlight of the free core handle, where you really get a lot more shaft length and freedom to manipulate it in certain ways, whether that's through a more relaxed stroke, a more whippy stroke, or whatever. And the other thing that people don't really talk about is the ability to modulate the flex length of the shaft too. Traditionally, with a wooden handle, oh, that's interesting. There's some weird residue that's coming off. I don't know if that's the heat or whatever, but I'm just gonna give this a once over here. It smells like Goo Gone. Well, what I was saying earlier is that if you have a wood handle, you're someone who shifts your grip from the top of the handle to the bottom of the handle. Now, the wood handle by itself doesn't flex that much, so even if you're holding it down here, the racket's going to feel different, but the shaft flex is going to remain pretty similar by and large, just because the handle doesn't flex. The difference here being that with a free core handle, it does make a difference, because if you hold the racket down here, you're getting that extra amount of flex that's within the handle. Whereas if you were to hold it up here, you don't really get that. So actually it responds differently to that grip change, which I've always thought was pretty interesting. And you might be wondering now, okay, Eric, well, what exactly is that difference? Well, so that I will say, and I haven't studied it closely enough to be able to articulate the difference, but it could be a good idea for a future video. Okay, so with that cleaned off, we can now move on to the electrical tape. So we're gonna get that out of the way. And the Goo Gone smell really sticks around. It's kind of annoying, especially if you're doing wooden handles. Sometimes you can even smell that if you ever take off the electrical tape again. Whoa, alright, future Eric here. My microphone very conveniently decided to go to sleep at a critical moment, so I'm just going to voice over this here. So as you can see, I'm beginning to apply my electrical tape, and what I'm talking about here in the video is that I prefer to start from the top right under the cone and work my way to the bottom of the grip, which is the opposite of how you would apply an overgrip. And part of the reason that I do that is because it's easy for me to align the beginning of the tape to the just under the cone. You're going to see that I wrap the tape around for a couple layers and line it up very precisely at the bottom of the cone. And the other reason is that if I start from the top and wrap the tape towards the bottom, the spiraling direction of the tape will be the opposite as the undergrip is, or sorry, the overgrip is, because the overgrip will be coming from the bottom to the top. And part of the advantage of that is there will be less of an effect on the contours lining up, because if they both go the same direction, if it happens that one of the textures, the high and low points on the tape or the grip line up, then suddenly you're going to get an overall kind of weird divot feeling on the grip, and that's not really good. So if you have them spiraling opposite directions, you don't really get that because they kind of cancel each other out. So yeah, one of the things that I like to do is to start my grip with 2 layers up here of electrical tape right under the cone. And you do have to stretch it a little bit at first because it's not flat. There's obviously some taper to the cone part, so I'll stretch it and I'll do 2 layers there. And part of the reason I do 2 layers is because, yeah, so I'm pointing at it there. Bottom of the cone has this sharp transition to the wooden grip. It's usually about 1 millimeter, and that transition can be pretty harsh. So putting a double layer of electrical tape right there allows for there be to an intermediary step between the cone, the height of the cone, and the height of the bare handle. So it just makes that transition a little less harsh. And as you can see, I'm starting to work my way up here. It's generally one thing that I'm doing is I'm doing a very mild overlap. You can do a full overlap where it won't really leave any texture, but the reason I do as little overlap as possible is because I want it to only be a single layer. Doing a full overlap is essentially a double layer of tape, which increases the thickness and also the weight. Electrical tape is, relatively speaking, a little on the heavy side, so adding a double layer of tape will add a certain amount of weight to overall weight to the racket and will change the balance. Well, you could also argue that taking off the stock grip changes the balance as well, but I would like to tune that through other means. And the other thing that you might have to watch out for on free core rackets specifically is leaving bubbles It doesn't really happen on wood. You don't get that issue there, but when you're putting it on plastic, sometimes you'll get these little bubbles, which if you do, you can just pop them with an X-Acto knife or some very sharp, fine blade. And next, when I get close to the end cap, you're going to see that I'll have to stretch the tape again, because there's another taper cone around here. And one thing that I learned over gripping rackets a long time is that if you try to end the tape flush to the bottom of the cone, which is what most people's instinct would be, that over time, because you stretched it and there's tension on the tape, it will actually slide down the end cap and it won't be flush with the bottom anymore. So it's gonna, slide down, and it's going to bunch up at the smaller side of the end cap, and that's not really what you want. So in order to avoid this, you're going to see that I'm actually going to finish the tape by overrunning the end by a little bit. I'm going to have a little bit of the tape, not quite half, maybe a third of the width, sitting off of the end. And what happens there is that that part that sits off of the end of the cap kind of peels over and creates like a little lip that prevents it from sliding down. And so that is what I'm doing there. So as you can see, because I did the double layer at the top of the grip, we have this almost like a mildly like a two-step to this electrical tape layer, where the double layer is a little bit higher than the single layer of the rest of the grip, and the double layer is just a little under the cone. It's creating two contours here. And the cool thing about this is that when I hold the racket, I can feel these contours with my fingers, and that allows me to accurately position my hand when I hold the racket in several different locations. And just these contours alone allow me to have 3 different hand positions, with my index finger under the first contour or under the second contour, or having my middle finger lined up on the middle contour, which is the double layer of electrical tape. So that's very helpful. So here I have my cushion wrap, and I realized I didn't talk about why I use this, so we can talk about it now. Once I've done my grip like this, if I put my overgrip on this directly, sometimes the bezels can be too harsh, or maybe this is still, as a grip, a little too small, right? So cushion wrap allows us to very finely tune the thickness and the cushion level of the grip, which is nice. It's very cheap stuff, so it's good. So just gonna go ahead and start a layer. Oopsies. Stop moving around. put that off camera so I could get it started. I try to tend towards a little less to start with. Cool. So with that done, we finally get to the grip part. I'm just going to put a yellow super grip. Cool. So a lot of people like doing the reverse pattern, and normally with the super grip, the tapered end is the one that you would start with, because you can start with a very, clean end by lining this up with the end of the grip. Then you would work your way up, and then you would use scissors to trim this end whenever you didn't need the rest. But if you're experienced at gripping rackets, then you can do the opposite way and start with the naked end. Now, I always like to make it overhang the rest of the grip. So, and the reason is similar for why I had the electrical tape spill over it, so it doesn't slide upwards. And the other reason, which I will show you very briefly in a moment, is that when you're playing and you're holding the racket at the end of the handle, especially if you're a singles player, I've seen some people will hold the racket, and you might think that the lowest racket position is holding it with your pinky resting along the end cap. But when you hold it at its lowest point, when your pinky is wrapping around the end cap, you see my palm is actually going below the end cap. See? And having that little bit of grip going over that corner just gives me a little bit of extra grip on my hands when my palm spills over that end cap. So that's nice. And I'm not really stretching or applying pressure to the grip, because the grip is actually pretty sensitive to stretching. And if I stretch it, then its properties will change. It'll be, for example, less tacky, it will wear out faster. So be a little careful of that. Nearing the end here. So when we get to the cone here, if I just wrap it without any pressure, then it starts to wrinkle. You can kind of see this part here. This is the only part of the grip, aside from the start, the beginning, where I would actually stretch the grip to make sure that it doesn't really wrinkle up. So you can see here is the advantage of having the tapered side at the end, is that you can have a very clean finish. You don't have to use a sticker. However, you don't have as much control over how high the grip goes, right? It's just the tapered end ends here. That's all I got. I typically like the grip to go to the very top of the cone. So this is not enough track length. So whenever this happens, I always unwind it and give myself a little more length. There's a couple methods I can use to achieve this, which is, one is spending a little less time at the base of the grip, like, kind of starting to spiral my way up sooner. That's one way. Another way is leaving bigger gaps between layers, like this layer and the last layer. I'm mostly doing them flush, but if you can leave up to like 1 or 2 millimeters of space, and you generally won't notice it when you're playing. So you can just use that as a way to space your grip. Okay, and again, we're going to start stretching it a little bit. Yeah, and then it's clear that this time I do have some extra length, so it's probably going to make it. Oh. Okay, and it's perfectly fine to try again, redo it when you need to. It's something that takes practice. Okay. Alrighty, folks. So there we have it. I have grip on my racket. Next step, to get it strung and then test it out. So that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.